Picture this. You are lying on your back in the pitch black. Above you, heavy wooden planks are groaning under the weight of dancing boots. You cannot move. You cannot breathe properly because the solid wood is pressing directly against your ribs. Every time the men above you stomp their feet to the rhythm of their victory songs, the planks crush down, snapping another bone in your chest. You are a prince of the Kievan Rus, and you are not being executed with a sword. You are being slowly suffocated beneath a makeshift floorboard while your conquerors eat, drink, and celebrate their victory right on top of you. The men feasting above your dying body are the Mongols. They have just wiped out an alliance of 80,000 men at the Kalka River without breaking a sweat, and this agonizing, humiliating death is their idea of a victory banquet. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The architect of that suffocating feast is a man named Subutai. If you read standard history textbooks, you might see him described as Genghis Khan's greatest general. That is a polite understatement. Subutai is not just a general, he is an apex predator in human skin, a tactical genius who treats war like a mathematical equation where the only acceptable result is the total annihilation of his enemies. By the year 1223, he has ridden thousands of miles from the Mongolian steppes, crushing empires, burning cities, and slaughtering anyone who dares to stand in his way. He commands an expeditionary force of 20,000 cavalrymen, highly mobile, incredibly disciplined machine of death that has never tasted defeat. They are the ghosts of the steppe. They strike faster than a medieval army can mobilize, and they retreat only to lure their arrogant enemies into devastating traps. After obliterating the Rus at the Kalka River, Subutai's mission is technically complete. Genghis Khan has ordered him to return home. Subutai turns his army east, marching back toward the Asian steppes, heavily burdened with plunder, slaves, and an ego that spans continents. His men believe they are untouchable. They believe the sky god Tengri has given them dominion over the entire earth, and the rotting corpses they leave behind are all the proof they need. But the universe has a very dark sense of humor. Subutai does not know it yet, but his perfect record is about to be shattered. He is marching his invincible army straight into a meat grinder. The men waiting for him do not fight on open plains. They do not care about chivalry or fair combat. They are waiting in the dense, suffocating forests of the Volga River, and they are about to teach the greatest general in history a terrifying lesson in humility. Subutai's intelligence network is legendary. He usually knows the exact number of enemy troops, the political rivalries of their commanders, and the precise terrain of the battlefield before he even saddles his horse. But as he moves north along the banks of the Volga River, his scouts are riding blind into an alien landscape. The open steppe, where the Mongol composite bow and light cavalry reign supreme, is giving way to dense timber, deep ravines, and muddy riverbanks. This is the territory of the Volga Bulgars. They are wealthy merchants and ruthless forest fighters who have watched the Mongol storm gather on their southern borders. They have listened to the rumors of the invincible horsemen from the east, and instead of panicking, they have grabbed their axes and started digging. Subutai assumes this will be just another minor skirmish, a brief slaughter to clear the road home. He expects the Bulgars to break and run the moment his heavy cavalry charges. It is the arrogance of an undefeated champion. He believes the world is his hunting ground and every other civilization is merely prey. But as the Mongol vanguard pushes deeper into the jagged hills of the Samara Bend, the eerie silence of the forest should be a warning. The wolves of the steppe are no longer the hunters. They have just walked blindly into a cage. To understand the catastrophic magnitude of what is about to happen in the Samara Bend, you have to understand the mind of Subutai. Look at the medieval European generals of the 13th century. They are aristocrats. They buy their commissions with bloodlines and wealth. They ride into battle weighed down by hundreds of pounds of steel, looking for personal glory, single combat, and ransoms. Subutai is none of those things. He is the son of a blacksmith. He did not inherit his position. He killed for it, outthought for it, and orchestrated the collapse of empires for it. To Subutai, chivalry is a mental illness. Honor is a meaningless concept invented by men who are about to die. War is not a gentleman's game. War is an industrial process of extermination. His army of 20,000 is not a traditional military force. It is a biological weapon. Every single man is mounted, accompanied by 3 or 4 remount horses, allowing them to travel at speeds that shatter the minds of contemporary scholars. While a European army might lumber forward at 10 or 15 miles a day, bogged down by wagons and camp followers, Subutai's horsemen can cover 60 miles a day. They do not carry supply trains. They drink the blood of their own horses by opening a small vein in the animal's neck when water is scarce. They survive on dried meat and fermented mare's milk. They are a self-sustaining storm of violence, but speed is only half the equation. The true terror of the Mongol war machine lies in its communication and discipline. A medieval battlefield is typically a chaotic nightmare of screaming men, clashing steel, and total confusion. Once the charge begins, generals lose all control. Subutai does not shout orders. He orchestrates his 20,000 men using a sophisticated system of flags, torches, and whistling arrows. He sits on a hilltop, often miles away from the front-line bloodshed, treating the battlefield like a massive chessboard. If a unit takes heavy casualties, he does not send reinforcements out of a sense of loyalty. He maneuvers another unit to exploit the gap the dying men created. His soldiers are cogs in a machine, and he is willing to sacrifice them if the arithmetic of the battle demands it. Their primary weapon, the Mongol composite bow, is a marvel of deadly engineering. Made of wood, horn, and sinew, it has a draw weight that rivals the modern sniper rifle in its lethal intent. It can pierce armor at staggering distances, but Subutai does not just rely on brute force. His signature move is the feigned retreat. He will send a vanguard to attack a larger force, only to have them panic and run away. The enemy, drunk on the illusion of victory, breaks formation and chases the fleeing Mongols. They chase them for miles, sometimes for days, stretching their own lines until their horses are exhausted and their infantry is strung out. And then, at a predetermined location, the trap springs. The fleeing Mongols suddenly turn around in perfect unison, while fresh, heavy cavalry hidden in the flanks slam into the exhausted, disorganized pursuers. It is not a battle. It is an execution. This is the exact tactic Subutai used to annihilate the Rus at the Kalka River. He lured them on a chase for 9 days before turning around and slaughtering them. He has spent his entire life perfecting the art of the trap. He is the Grand Master of the ambush. He has broken the greatest armies of the known world by using their own aggression against them. He believes he has seen every trick, every maneuver, and every possible variation of human combat. But as his vanguard trots deeper into the sprawling, suffocating forests of the Volga region, Subutai's genius is working against him. He is looking for an army to outmaneuver. He is looking for a general to outsmart. He does not realize that the Volga Bulgars are not preparing to fight a war. They are preparing an extermination of their own. And for the first time in his life, the Grand Master of the ambush is marching his men directly onto the final mark of a kill zone. If you look at a map of the 13th century world, the Volga-Bulgaria Empire does not look like a military superpower. They are a society of merchants, sitting on the lucrative trade routes connecting northern Europe to the Islamic world. They deal in silver, honey, slaves, and furs. They build prosperous, heavily fortified cities of timber and earth along the banks of the mighty Volga River. To a man like Subutai, who has just crushed the combined military might of the Kievan Rus and the Cumans, a nation of shopkeepers and river traders, probably looks like an all-you-can-eat buffet. He expects them to hide behind their wooden walls, waiting patiently to be besieged, starved, and eventually slaughtered. But Subutai has fundamentally misunderstood his prey. The Volga Bulgars are not just wealthy merchants, they are the undisputed masters of the forest. They have spent centuries surviving in a brutal, unforgiving landscape where the winters can freeze the blood in your veins and the summer rains turn the earth into an impassable, sucking swamp. They know that fighting Mongol heavy cavalry on an open field is a mathematically guaranteed suicide. They have heard the horrific stories bleeding over the southern borders from the Kalka River. They know about the suffocating floorboards. They know about the relentless, feigned retreats. They understand exactly how the Mongol war machine operates, and more importantly, they know its one fatal weakness. It requires space. A Mongol horse archer needs room to wheel, room to shoot, and room to breathe. Take away this space, and the terrifying ghost of the steppe becomes just another man sitting on a horse, waiting to get a heavy axe through his skull. King Abdullah Chelbir, the ruler of the Volga Bulgars, makes a decision that defies all conventional military logic of the era. He does not march his army out to meet Subutai in a glorious doomed display of honor. He does not lock his city gates and pray for a miracle. He orders his men to melt into the trees. They abandon the plains entirely and draw their forces back into a geographic nightmare known as the Samara Bend. The Samara Bend is a massive hairpin loop in the Volga River, tightly hugged by the jagged, heavily forested ridges of the Zhiguli Mountains. It is a claustrophobic maze of steep ravines, blind corners, and dense timber where the sunlight barely touches the muddy floor. It is an environment that violently rejects cavalry. And in the weeks before Subutai's arrival, the Bulgars have been incredibly busy. Thousands of men armed with heavy felling axes have been quietly reshaping the landscape. They are not building walls, they are building a meat grinder. They chop down massive oak and pine trees, scoring the trunks deeply so they are ready to snap and crash across the narrow pathways at a moment's notice. They dig deep, hidden trenches in the mud, filling them with sharpened wooden stakes, angled perfectly to tear open the soft underbelly of a galloping horse. They camouflage these pits meticulously with woven branches, moss, and dead leaves. They haul heavy stones and massive logs to the tops of the steep ravines, balancing them precariously on the edge, waiting for gravity to do the work of 1,000 swords. The silence of the forest is unnatural. It is the silence of a held breath. The local wildlife has already fled, driven away by the scent of thousands of unwashed, sweating men hiding in the brush. The Bulgar infantrymen are rubbing mud and crushed leaves over their chainmail to kill any reflection of light. They communicate not with loud horns or drums, but with the subtle mimicry of bird calls. They are bleeding into the environment, becoming the forest itself. The Bulgars know that Subutai is blinded by his own invincibility. His scouts, accustomed to the endless visibility of the flat steppe, cannot penetrate the dense canopy of the Zhiguli Mountains. When they look into the Samara Bend, all they see is a quiet, empty woodland. They have no idea that they are looking at an organic slaughterhouse, and the door is about to lock behind them. The art of the feigned retreat is the absolute cornerstone of Mongol warfare. Subutai has spent his entire life perfecting the illusion of panic. He knows exactly how a terrified army behaves when the line breaks. He knows the smell of fear, the chaotic rhythm of retreating footsteps, and the desperate way men discard their heavy shields to run faster. Because he is the undisputed master of this trick, he fundamentally believes that no one else is capable of using it against him. Arrogance is a blinding, fatal disease, and the Mongol vanguard is heavily infected. When the leading elements of Subutai's army finally make contact with the Bulgar forces near the edge of the timberline, they do not see a sophisticated trap. They see exactly what their inflated egos expect to see. The Bulgar commander has orchestrated a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. He does not deploy his heavy infantry. He does not reveal his true numbers. Instead, he sends out a deliberately ragged, disorganized detachment of light skirmishers to meet the most dangerous cavalry on earth. The Mongols react with predictable aggression. They unleash a devastating volley of arrows expecting the usual slaughter. The Bulgars take the hit and instantly shatter. They scream, break formation, and sprint wildly toward the safety of the dense forest. They leave behind dropped spears, half-empty quivers, and dead bodies. It is a flawless performance of total panic. To the Mongol vanguard commanders, this is not suspicious in the slightest. This is simply the natural order of the universe asserting itself. They are the chosen conquerors of the sky god, and these forest-dwelling merchants are acting exactly like the prey they are supposed to be. Intoxicated by the bloodlust of the Kalka River massacre, the Mongol officers do not hesitate. They do not wait for Subutai's orders. They do not pause to send scouts into the tree line to check for ambushes. They sound the charge, whipping their horses into a frenzy, eager to ride down the fleeing Bulgars and reap the plunder. This is the exact moment the pendulum of history swings. The Mongols surge forward, galloping blindly into the tightening funnel of the Samara Bend. Almost immediately, the environment begins to strip away their tactical advantages. The wide, sweeping lines of light cavalry that dominate the open steppe are violently compressed. The sheer walls of the ravines force the horsemen into tight, claustrophobic columns. The ground beneath them is no longer hard-packed dirt. It is a treacherous mixture of soft mud, hidden roots, and rotting vegetation. The Mongol ponies, famous for their endurance, begin to struggle. Their hooves slip and slide. The riders are violently jostled, losing the smooth, stable platform they need to fire their composite bows with accuracy. The thick, overlapping canopy of ancient oak and pine trees blocks out the sunlight, plunging the charging army into a disorienting emerald twilight. As the Mongols push deeper into the gorge, the fleeing Bulgars maintain a perfect distance. They stay just out of sword reach, acting as a tantalizing lure, dragging the predators inch by inch into the dark center of the maze. The Mongol soldiers are forced to sling their bows and draw their close-quarter sabers simply to hack away the thick vines and low-hanging branches whipping at their faces. Farther back in the column, Subutai might be feeling the first cold prickle of unease. The momentum of the pursuit is dragging his entire 20,000-man army into a geographical choke point. His communication lines are breaking down. The signaling flags and whistling arrows he uses to orchestrate his troops are utterly useless in the dense foliage. His invincible war machine is losing its structural integrity, fragmenting into isolated pockets of confused horsemen struggling against the terrain. But the momentum is unstoppable. The trap is flawlessly baited, and the greatest army in the world is swallowing the hook right down to the stomach. The Zhiguli Mountains do not look like a battlefield. They look like a tomb. Imagine forcing a great white shark to fight in a shallow, muddy swamp. That is exactly what is happening to the Mongol cavalry as they are funneled into the Samara Bend. The Volga River, cold, fast, and infinitely deep, acts as an impenetrable liquid wall on their left. On their right, the steep, jagged limestone cliffs of the Zhiguli Range rise violently, covered in ancient twisted pines that look like the teeth of a rusted bear trap. Between these two impassable barriers lies a narrow, winding track of rotting mud, dead leaves, and suffocating timber. Every step forward compresses the Mongol vanguard tighter together. The legendary spacing and fluid maneuvering of the steppe warriors vanish entirely. Knees smash into knees, cracking kneecaps against iron stirrups. War horses, bred for the limitless horizons of the open plains, begin to panic. They are intelligent animals, and they can smell the confinement. They buck and rear as they are crushed against one another, their hooves sinking deep into the treacherous, root-choked earth, snapping their own legs in the hidden crevices of the forest floor. The physical reality of the environment methodically strips the Mongols of their greatest weapons. To fire their devastating composite bow with lethal force, a rider needs a stable platform, room to pull the draw back to his ear, and a clear line of sight. Here, the canopy is so thick it blocks out the sun, casting a sickly emerald twilight over the struggling, suffocating column. Low-hanging branches slap at their faces, tearing at their leather helmets. Thick vines tangle in their reins and wrap around the necks of their horses. When a Mongol horseman instinctively tries to draw his bowstring, his elbow hits the chest of the man riding tightly next to him. If he manages to loose an arrow, it immediately buries itself harmlessly into the trunk of a massive oak tree just 10 feet away. They are completely, helplessly jammed. This is the terrifying, calculated genius of the Bulgar strategy. They have not just chosen a defensive position, they have weaponized the geography itself. They have forced the fastest, most mobile army on the planet to fight a claustrophobic, static war in the mud. At the head of the column, the vanguard commanders finally realize they are not chasing a broken, fleeing enemy. The panicked Bulgar skirmishers they were so eager to run down have simply vanished, melting into the shadows of the tree line like ghosts. The deafening, earth-shaking roar of thousands of galloping horses degrades into a confused, chaotic milling. Men are shouting, screaming orders in different dialects, desperately trying to turn their mounts, but there is absolutely nowhere to go. The sheer momentum of the army behind them is still violently pushing forward, blindly cramming thousands more riders into the tightening choke point. It is a fatal, crushing traffic jam of men and beasts. Far to the rear, Subutai is blind. His sophisticated network of scouts, whistling arrows and signaling flags is completely paralyzed by the dense foliage and the winding terrain. He cannot see the front line. He cannot hear the desperate warnings over the noise of his own army's blind advance. He is operating on the fatal, arrogant assumption that the enemy is already broken and running for their lives. For a man who calculates war with the cold, unfeeling precision of a mathematician, the sudden, total loss of control is a psychological shock. The chessboard has been flipped in the dark, and all his pieces are sliding toward the fire. The noise of the marching armies slowly dies down, replaced by a horrifying, pregnant silence. The Mongol warriors, suffocating in their heavy armor, peer into the dense timber lining the ridges high above them. The air is heavy with the smell of sweat, wet horsehair, and the unmistakable metallic tang of human fear. They are waiting for the ambush they now know is inevitable. They are staring up at the steep, muddy slopes, completely exposed, completely immobilized, waiting for the sky to fall. And then the forest above them begins to move. The trigger is not a war horn. It is the sharp, terrifying crack of heavy ropes snapping under immense tension. High above the trapped Mongol vanguard, the Bulgar engineers cut the lines holding back the massive oak logs they have spent weeks balancing on the edge of the ravines. Gravity takes over. Dozens of massive tree trunks, some weighing over a ton, accelerate down the steep, muddy slopes, tearing through the underbrush like artillery shells. They do not hit a line of soldiers. They slam into a packed, unmoving column of flesh and bone. The impact is catastrophic. Horses are pulverized instantly. Armored men are crushed flat against the muddy earth, their ribs snapping like dry twigs under the sheer kinetic weight of the falling timber. But the logs are not just designed to kill, they are designed to amputate. They crash across the narrow forest track, physically slicing the Mongol vanguard into isolated, trapped segments. The cavalrymen are boxed in by impenetrable walls of wood, rock, and screaming, dying horses. The fluid, unstoppable Mongol war machine has been chopped into manageable, bite-sized pieces. Then the arrows blot out the little sunlight that remains. These are not the sweeping, long-range volleys the Mongols are used to dodging on the open steppe. These are heavy, armor-piercing shafts fired at point-blank range from the dense brush, just yards away. The Mongols instinctively try to maneuver to wheel their horses and return fire, but they cannot move. They are pinned shoulder to shoulder in the mud. They do not carry large, heavy infantry shields because their defense has always been speed. Stripped of that speed, they are nothing but stationary targets in a shooting gallery. The arrows punch through leather lamella armor, burying deep into necks, thighs, and the soft underbellies of the terrified war horses. Before the Mongols can even comprehend the scale of the disaster, the forest erupts. Thousands of Bulgar infantrymen pour down the sides of the ravines. They do not look like a traditional army. They are covered in mud, screaming with the pent-up rage of a people who have heard the horror stories from the Kalka River and decided they will not be the next victims. They do not carry elegant swords. They wield heavy timber axes, armor-crushing maces, and long poles with hooked blades designed for one specific purpose: pulling a rider off a horse. The melee that follows is not a battle, it is an extermination. The Bulgars dive under the flailing hooves of the Mongol ponies, hamstringing the animals with brutal efficiency. When a horse collapses, screaming in agony, the rider is thrown into the deep, sucking mud. Once a Mongol cavalryman is on his back in this environment, he is already dead. Their armor is designed for the saddle, not for grappling in a suffocating swamp. The Bulgar warriors swarm the fallen riders like angry ants, driving heavy axes through helmets and smashing skulls into the roots of the ancient trees. The legendary discipline of Subutai's army violently disintegrates. Men who have never known fear, who have spent their entire lives treating other civilizations like cattle, are suddenly paralyzed by absolute terror. Those in the middle of the column, hearing the mechanical slaughter happening at the front, try to desperately turn their horses around, but the rear of the army is still pushing forward, completely ignorant of the trap. The result is a catastrophic, crushing stampede. Mongol horses trample Mongol riders. Sabers are drawn not against the enemy, but against their own brothers in a desperate, animalistic frenzy to escape the suffocating gorge. Miles away, Sitting safely outside the tree line, Subutai finally hears the true sound of his defeat. It is not the organized clash of steel on steel. It is the muffled, chaotic roar of 20,000 men and beasts drowning in a sea of mud and wood. The Grandmaster of the Trap has just walked his entire empire into a meat grinder, and the handle is turning fast. When the mechanical slaughter in the Samara Bend finally grinds to a halt, the rivers of mud are choked with the bodies of the invincible Mongol vanguard. But for a few thousand survivors, the nightmare is just beginning. In the brutal mathematics of medieval warfare, capture usually means one of two things. You either receive a quick blade to the throat, or you are condemned to a short, agonizing life of slave labor. The Mongols understand this. They respect absolute violence. They fully expect to be tortured or executed, and they are prepared to die with the stoic arrogance of apex predators. What they do not expect, and what they absolutely cannot psychologically process, is what King Gabdullah Chelbir of the Volga Bulgars decides to do with them. The Bulgar king looks at these broken, mud-caked prisoners. These are the terrors of the East, the men who suffocated Russian princes under floorboards and burned entire civilizations to ash. Now they are shivering in the damp forest, stripped of their weapons and heavy armor, tied together by the neck with cheap hemp rope. Chelbir realizes that simply executing them is a waste of a historic opportunity. Slicing their throats only makes them martyrs to their brothers. Chelbir wants to inflict a wound deeper than flesh. He wants to humiliate them so profoundly that the story will echo all the way back to Genghis Khan's tent. He wants to strip away their mythical status and remind the world that these untouchable ghosts of the steppe are just pathetic, bleeding men. The Bulgars send a messenger to the remnants of Subutai's army sitting safely outside the forest, offering a ransom for the prisoners. Subutai, a man who deals in conquered kingdoms, silk, and mountains of silver, expects a negotiation of astronomical wealth. He expects the Bulgars to demand the entirety of his plundered loot in exchange for his elite veterans. Instead, the Bulgar demand is a masterclass in psychological warfare. They do not want gold, they do not want silver, they want sheep. Specifically, they demand 1 ram for every captured Mongol soldier. To understand how devastating this insult is, you have to understand the rigid martial culture of the Mongol Empire. To a steppe warrior, the horse is sacred, the wolf is their spiritual ancestor, and the ultimate symbol of cunning and lethal force. But the sheep is prey. It is a stupid, docile, bleating animal born only to be sheared, herded by dogs and eaten. By equating the exact monetary and spiritual value of Genghis Khan's most elite killers to the lowest, most pathetic farm animal on the steppe, the Bulgars are committing an act of unparalleled cultural desecration. It is an insult designed to mathematically destroy a warrior's soul. Subutai has absolutely no choice. His vanguard is shattered, his momentum is completely broken, and he desperately needs his surviving men back if he hopes to survive the long march home. He is forced to accept the terms. The exchange takes place on the muddy banks of the Volga River, and it is a scene of pure, suffocating, dark comedy. Picture the reality of this moment. Thousands of surviving Mongol warriors, men who honestly believed they were the divine wrath of the sky god, are forced to limp barefoot across the exchange line. For every battered, humiliated soldier that crosses back to the Mongol side, a bleating, foul-smelling ram is physically handed over to the grinning Bulgar infantry. The dense forest echoes with the uproarious, mocking laughter of the merchants and the pathetic bleating of thousands of sheep. The great Mongol war machine, the most terrifying military force the world has ever seen, has been reduced to a literal livestock trade. The physical wounds of the ambush will eventually heal, but the psychological scar of the ram exchange will burn in the minds of the survivors forever. They are no longer the untouchable conquerors of the known world. They are the men who were bought with sheep. And as Subutai sits on his horse, watching his broken veterans march back into camp accompanied by the overpowering stench of wet wool, a cold, deeply personal fury takes root in his chest. The Mongol war machine runs on a very specific fuel, the absolute, unshakable belief in its own divine supremacy. To the warriors of the steppe, victory is not just a matter of superior tactics or better archery. It is a religious mandate. They genuinely believe that the sky god Tengri has granted them ownership of the entire earth, and everyone who resists them is not just an enemy, but a blasphemer defying the natural order of the universe. When you believe you are the literal instrument of divine wrath, you fight with a terrifying, limitless confidence. But what happens to a man's mind when the wrath of God is dragged into the mud, beaten with heavy axes, and traded for livestock? The long ride back to the steppes of Asia is not a victorious parade. It is a silent, agonizing funeral procession. The physical wounds are horrifying. You have men with crushed ribs coughing up black blood, riders missing fingers from close quarters axe fighting, and faces permanently disfigured by the unforgiving bark of the Zhiguli pines. But physical wounds are common in war. Steppe warriors know how to bleed. It is the psychological devastation that is truly terrifying. These are men who normally sing roaring songs of conquest over the burning ruins of cities. Now they ride with their heads bowed, staring blankly at the manes of their horses, their minds permanently trapped in the suffocating darkness of the forest. The ram exchange was not just an insult, it was a psychological amputation. The Bulgars did not just defeat the Mongols physically, they systematically dismantled their mythology. They took the apex predators of the 13th century and successfully branded them as prey. Every time a survivor closes his eyes, he does not see the glorious open plains of his homeland. He sees the heavy falling timber. He hears the screams of his brothers being trampled in the mud. And worst of all, he hears the pathetic, mocking bleat of the sheep that bought his life. That sound is a parasite, eating away at the fragile ego of the undefeated conqueror. For Subutai, the trauma is entirely different, but equally profound. He is not suffering from fear, he is suffering from the total collapse of his mathematical reality. Subutai has spent his entire life treating warfare like a predictable equation. He believed he had mastered every variable of human conflict. The Samara Bend forces him to confront a terrifying new variable, his own fallibility. He was outsmarted. He was lured into a trap by men he considered beneath his notice. He allowed his own arrogance and the arrogance of his vanguard to blind him to the most obvious geographical warning signs. The Grandmaster of the ambush was brutally ambushed, and the humiliation burns in his chest like swallowed coals. But Subutai is a survivor, and his calculating mind quickly moves past the shock and identifies the true existential threat of this defeat. The danger is not the loss of a few thousand elite cavalrymen. Genghis Khan has limitless manpower. The true danger is the breaking of the illusion. The Mongol Empire holds its vast conquered territories together through the weaponization of terror. Kingdoms surrender without a fight because they believe the Mongol horde is an unstoppable, supernatural force of nature. If they bleed, they can be killed. If they can be killed, the world will stop running from them. If the story of the Samara Bend spreads, If the kings of Europe and the sultans of the Middle East hear that a confederation of forest merchants slaughtered the invincible vanguard and bought the survivors with sheep, the illusion will shatter. The conquered nations will realize that the ghosts of the steppe are just mortal men who make fatal mistakes in the mud. Rebellions will ignite across the entire continent. Subutai knows that this defeat cannot just be managed, it must be erased. The survivors are sworn to absolute secrecy, and the greatest military mind of the medieval world begins to cultivate a cold, patient obsession. He is no longer fighting for mere conquest. He is fighting to bury a memory. Understood this better than anyone. They understood this better than anyone. They were not just pioneers of psychological warfare on the battlefield. They were masters of propaganda. When Subutai finally limps back onto the Asian steppes with the battered remnants of his vanguard, he does not face execution. Genghis Khan is a ruthless pragmatist. He knows Subutai is a once-in-a-generation genius, and killing him over one catastrophic failure in the mud would be a waste of a vital asset. But Genghis also knows that the illusion of Mongol invincibility is the only thing keeping his massive, fractured empire from tearing itself apart. The defeat at the Samara Bend cannot be officially acknowledged. It must be excised from reality. If you read The Secret History of the Mongols, the most important and comprehensive chronicle of the empire, you will find incredibly detailed accounts of Genghis Khan's victories, his political maneuvers, and his glorious conquests. But when it comes to the year 1223 and the expedition into the Volga region, the text becomes suspiciously vague. The annihilation of the vanguard, the crushing timber, the humiliation of the ram exchange, these events simply do not exist in the official record. The Mongol historians spin a narrative of a tactical withdrawal, a minor skirmish not worth remembering. They bury the truth under a mountain of silence. But silence does not heal a shattered ego. For the surviving soldiers, the trauma is a festering wound they are forbidden to talk about. For Subutai, the silence is a 13-year incubation period for the most terrifying grudge in human history. He does not throw a tantrum. He does not beg the Khan for an immediate, hot-blooded revenge campaign. That is not how a mathematician of death operates. Subutai understands exactly why he failed. He failed because he arrogantly treated the dense forests of the Volga like the open steppes of Asia. He failed because he let the enemy dictate the environment. To destroy the Volga Bulgars, he does not just need a bigger army. He needs to invent a completely new way of waging war. For over a decade, Subutai wages war across the continent, crushing empires in China and Persia. But a dark, obsessive corner of his mind never leaves the Samara Bend. He begins to systematically prepare for his return. He interrogates captured merchants from the northern trade routes. He studies the seasonal flooding of the Volga River. He maps out the choke points, the ravines, and the fortified timber cities of the Bulgar merchants. He knows that his light cavalry cannot penetrate the deep woods, so he begins to integrate heavy siege engineering into his mobile forces. He drafts Chinese and Persian engineers, men who know how to build massive catapults and traction trebuchets that can shatter ancient oak walls. He's no longer planning a cavalry raid. He is designing a rolling apocalypse. The years bleed away. Genghis Khan dies and the empire passes to his son, Ogedei. The world assumes the Mongol hunger has been temporarily satisfied. The kings of Europe and the merchants of the Volga grow complacent, believing the storm has passed them by forever. King Abdullah Chelbir, the architect of the Samara Bend ambush, passes away, leaving his kingdom wealthy, confident, and fatally unaware of what is brewing in the east. They believe they are the only people on earth who broke the Mongol war machine. They do not realize that they did not break it. They simply forced it to evolve. By 1236, the preparations are finally complete. Subutai is an older man now, heavy and battered by decades of continuous warfare. But his mind is sharper and infinitely more cruel. He has gathered the largest, most technologically advanced army the Mongol Empire has ever assembled, upwards of 130,000 men, armed with gunpowder, siege engines, and a burning, inherited hatred for the forest dwellers. The Grandmaster of the ambush mounts his horse and turns his massive war machine west. He is going back to the river. And this time, he is not coming for a ransom. 13 years is a long time to harbour a grudge. For most men, anger slowly fades into a dull ache of memory. But for Subutai, the humiliation of the Samara Bend did not fade. It crystallized into a cold, meticulous blueprint for genocide. In the autumn of 1236, the earth along the banks of the Volga River begins to tremble once again. The merchants and forest fighters of Volga, Bulgaria, hear the familiar rumble of hooves, and they prepare to execute their grandfathers' tactics. They retreat toward the deep timber. They sharpen their heavy axes. They wait for the arrogant light cavalry to charge blindly into the mud. But the army marching toward them is not the same force they fought a decade ago. Subutai has not brought 20,000 horsemen. He has brought 130,000 soldiers. He has brought Chinese siege engineers, Persian artillerymen, and thousands of slave laborers. He has brought the combined industrial and technological might of the largest empire on the planet. The Bulgars wait in their hidden ravines, ready to spring their traps. But Subutai does not order his vanguard into the trees. He has learned his lesson. If your enemy uses the forest as a weapon, you do not fight the forest, you simply erase it. The Mongol engineers construct massive traction trebuchets just outside the tree line. They unleash a storm of incendiary projectiles, naphtha, and primitive gunpowder bombs into the dry autumn foliage. The trap does not spring, it catches fire. The suffocating woods that once destroyed the Mongol cavalry are turned into a blazing inferno, flushing the screaming Bulgar infantry out into the open plains where the heavy cavalry is waiting to ride them down. Subutai then marches on the great Bulgar capital of Bilar. The city is a masterpiece of timber fortification, heavily defended by confident veterans who still tell jokes about the bleeding Mongols and the bleating sheep. The siege does not take months. The evolved Mongol war machine shatters the ancient oak walls in a matter of days. When the gates finally splinter and collapse, Subutai does not offer terms. He does not ask for gold, and he certainly does not ask for livestock. He unleashes hell. The slaughter is absolute and systematic. The Mongols do not just kill the soldiers, they execute the merchants, the women, the children, and the animals. They burn the trade outposts to the ground and smash the foundations of the cities. The debt of the ram exchange is paid back with rivers of blood. The kingdom of Volga, Bulgaria, a wealthy and prosperous empire, ceases to exist. It is wiped from the map so thoroughly that for centuries, mainstream history barely remembered it was ever there. This is why the Battle of Samara Bend is forgotten. The master of the ambush ensured that the only people who remembered his singular, humiliating defeat were left to rot in the ashes of their own ruined cities. Subutai would go on to crush the Russian principalities, invade Poland, and annihilate the armies of Hungary. He would become the undefeated nightmare that stalked Europe. But buried deep beneath the charred earth of the Volga, the truth remains. The greatest military genius of the medieval world was once beaten, humiliated, and bought with sheep. It teaches us a terrifying lesson about history. Sometimes David beats Goliath, but sometimes Goliath survives the stone, goes home, puts on heavier armor, comes back to crush David into dust. If you made it to the end of this dark journey, you are clearly someone who appreciates the gritty, uncomfortable truths of our past. Please make sure you are subscribed and have the bell notification turned on. I have a lot more forgotten history to uncover with you. And before you go, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Bulgar king made a fatal mistake by humiliating Subutai with the ram exchange? Or was the utter destruction of their civilization in 1236 inevitable, no matter what they did? Let the debate begin below. If you want to see how the unstoppable Mongol Empire eventually faced its ultimate match in the deserts of the Middle East, click the video on your screen right now to watch the Battle of Ain Jalut. I will see you there. I will see you